This is a short review of preclusion. Issue spotting. A preclusion case is always going to involve one litigation which goes to a judgment, and then a question about whether some other issue or some other litigation can go ahead and proceed or is precluded or barred by the prior judgment. So you're always going to see a past case going to judgment and then a future litigation in a preclusion case. One of the keys is there are two types of preclusion, and the way to remember them is simply remember the different goal of each doctrine. Claim preclusion's aim is to stop a plaintiff splitting her claims. We don't want her to have multiple cases over one incident. So if you want to remember a simple concept, the concept is that the plaintiff has to assert all her claims arising from one transaction or occurrence in one lawsuit. You get one lawsuit for one transaction. The plaintiff can't have multiple lawsuits. The other doctrine is issue preclusion. Issue preclusion is designed to stop do-overs. If someone has litigated and lost an issue, then we don't want them to get a do-over, to ask for a different decision on that issue, even in a different case. Let's take a quick look at each one. Claim preclusion. So remember, plaintiff can't split her claims into multiple cases. So an example would be if defendant was driving drunk and hit the plaintiff, injuring both the plaintiff and her bicycle. She couldn't file two lawsuits. She couldn't file a lawsuit over damages for her bike, and after that's gone to judgment, then file a second lawsuit asking for damages for injuries to her arm. She would have to bring both of these in one lawsuit because she only has one lawsuit for one transaction. No claim splitting. Let's look at the criteria. So, in the second case, the defendant's going to argue that plaintiff's claim is barred because plaintiff should have raised this claim in the first lawsuit. So what would the defendant have to show to succeed on claim preclusion? First, and this is the one they're likely to test, you got to show that the claim the plaintiff is now asserting is the same one she had in the prior lawsuit, i.e. it comes from the same transaction. So in our case, if she sued for injury to her bike, gets a judgment, and then sues for injury to her arm, it's the same claim because it comes from the same transaction. Let's look at the second criteria, the same parties in both lawsuits. In other words, it has to be the same plaintiff and defendant. One trick that they sometimes test is if a driver hits two people. So here the driver hits person A and person B. Notice, and common sense tells you this, each of them has a claim. It's not the same claim. Person A has a claim and person B has a claim. So even if person A litigates their case and it comes to a judgment, that can't bind B because B has their own claim. So you're only going to have claim preclusion if it's the same plaintiff against the same defendant. You also sometimes see a question about whether it's the same party because someone's representative has sued. Obviously, if your executor sues for you, it's going to bind the underlying party. Finally, the third criteria is you have to have a valid final judgment on the merits in the first case. For claim preclusion, this is very broad, so it's going to cover even settlements if they're put into a judgment. Obviously, it's going to cover summary judgment. The only thing it's not going to cover is if the first case is dismissed because of a procedural error, a procedural problem, you're not going to have a valid final judgment on the merits. Okay, so claim preclusion, the goal is no claim splitting, and the three criteria, same claim, same party's judgment, are simply meant to check whether the plaintiff is in fact asserting part of the claim she actually litigated in the first case. Let's look at the second doctrine, which is issue preclusion. The goal for issue preclusion is very distinct. It's no do-overs. So all we're saying in issue preclusion is that a party has litigated and lost an issue, and they're going to be bound by that decision. Even in a new, different case, we're not going to give them the opportunity to redo or re-litigate an issue they've litigated and lost. If you remember this simple concept, you're going to remember the criteria. So, here are the 4 criteria. Sometimes you'll see them split up into 5, but 4 is easier, so let's do 4. And the example we're going to do is, suppose I agree to deliver whiskey to Professor Twist's office at 9 o'clock every evening, and I fail to deliver whiskey. She sues me, and my defense in the case is that I thought it was 9 o'clock Scottish time, so I didn't really breach the contract. The court listens to our arguments about whether it means 9 o'clock Scottish time or American time and concludes that it means American time, and I lose. Then later on, I again fail to deliver the whiskey. Professor Twist has a new case against me because there's a new breach, and I again assert the same issue. I say, no, the contract means Scottish time. So, just in terms of a broad concept, you'll see I litigated and lost the issue of what time, and so issue preclusion is going to bar me from re-arguing that issue. So let's look at the formal criteria. Same issue. So what you're looking for is not an entire claim, but a simple issue, like the issue of whether the contract meant 9 o'clock Scottish or American time. The second thing is, if we're going to bar me from re-litigating it in the second case, we have to make sure that I actively litigated the issue the first time through. So we're going to ask whether that issue was actually litigated and decided in the first case, and that the first case turned on it. It wasn't just a defense that was asserted but never decided, nor was it one of multiple grounds for a ruling, so we can't tell whether the case really turned on it. So for issue preclusion, you're going to see a question of whether that issue was actually actively litigated in the first case, and the first case turned on it, so it's fair that I be bound by the decision on that issue in the first case. Let's now look at the third criteria, which is that you have to have a valid final judgment. In other words, I have to have lost on that issue before issue preclusion can apply against me. So once again, you're just looking for a judgment on that exact issue. The final question is parties. Does it have to be the same parties? First, you can only assert issue preclusion against someone who's L&L, litigated and lost. So the party against whom issue preclusion will apply has litigated and lost in the prior case. So the real question with same parties is by whom? Who can use issue preclusion? Most states now recognize non-mutual issue preclusion, and that means that a new plaintiff or a new party could assert issue preclusion against someone who had litigated and lost. So let's do a simple example. So if you remember our drunk driver, he's driving along and this time he hits 2 bicyclists. If the first bicyclist sues, arguing that the defendant was driving drunk and wins, right? So the issue that we're looking at here is the defendant was driving drunk, it was actually litigated and determined, and it was necessary to the case. The plaintiff couldn't win unless they proved he was drunk, and there's a final valid judgment. Who can use this? So notice we can use this, the decision of this issue, against the driver because he litigated and lost the issue of whether he was drunk. The doctrine of non-mutual issue preclusion says that the second bicyclist, when he sues for his injuries, right, a new case, a new claim, he can assert that because the defendant driver has already litigated and lost, he is barred from relitigating the issue of whether he was drunk. So non-mutual simply means that a new party can come in and use issue preclusion against someone who's litigated and lost. So remember to contrast the two doctrines. Just remember their goals. Goal of claim preclusion, no claim splitting. Plaintiff has to assert all her claims from one transaction or occurrence in one lawsuit. So just check, is it the same claim, i.e. transactionally related, same parties, final judgment? Issue preclusion, the doctrine is that the party has litigated and lost the issue and they can't get a do-over. So what are you going to check? Is it the exact same issue? Was it actually and actively litigated so it's fair to bind that person? Did they lose, i.e. was there a final valid judgment on that issue? And then who can use it? You use issue preclusion against someone who's litigated and lost. And today, new parties can use issue preclusion, non-mutual issue preclusion against someone who's litigated and lost. I hope this helps. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Bye.